Hi, I'm John Atack,
I'm Michelle Haslam.
I'm Sam Atack.
and we're here to talk about the new Kadampa Tradition. There's been a very good article by B. Schofield. There'll be a link. And Sam has some questions that have arisen from this article.
That's right.
Thanks for taking the time to read it.
Yeah, it was a good article. Are members pressured to make donations to the new Kadampa Tradition?
Yeah, so this seems to have changed over the years. So Tenzin Pellior talks about how the NKT have learnt not to coerce people into giving donations and then telling them, then gaslighting them, which is what they did to him in Germany. This was actually very common in Germany. So people gave what they thought was a loan, and then they were later told, oh no, you didn't say that, because our memory, it can be inaccurate, and sometimes we don't realise what we've said. Actually, what you said was that this was a gift.
Okay.
Yes.
Look into my eyes, look into my eyes.
So they don't sign anything, they just hand money over?
I don't know what would have been done back in the day. Tenzin also gave his laptop, what he thought was temporarily, and then he was told later that he didn't need it back because there was no point studying at university because that was a completely meaningless activity. So yeah, there is pressure to give money through things like paying for other people to go on retreats and to festivals, because it's considered that you'll have very fortunate karma if you give your money for someone else to attend a teaching over and above yourself. So previous members have said that this led them to spend lots of money supporting other people. And now, when I lived there, people did give loans, but I think there was quite a lot of paperwork. And I think that they've learnt that they must give people their money back these days, because they will get in trouble. So they seem to have adapted. I would say there's still some psychological pressure. I was asked to give money, I didn't, but I did feel some judgment and pressure from the admin director where I lived, that would be a virtuous thing to do with my money, and she didn't seem too impressed when I said no. So I'd say that there is still pressure, but they don't tend to deceive people in the way that they used to. Some people are still claiming benefits in order to funnel money into the group. That goes to the International Temples Fund. Some of these people would be on benefits anyway, but some of them wouldn't. They are signing on in order to live in the centres. So giving up a job in order to do that when they are actually able to work.
And with a retreat or something like that, how much does that cost to go on a retreat?
I'm not up to date on that, but I remember like a half-day course was about £30, a full-day course was about £40, one-off meditation classes were about £6. I don't know if that's gone up at all. Some people pay a monthly subscription, which I think was about £40 a month, in order to go to their foundation program classes, which are like a step up from the beginner level classes. And then a retreat, it really depends on the length. They're not that expensive compared to other retreat type experiences. And recently, someone who's done an audio testimony that will soon be released on my channel, she said that this was one of the reasons that she went there, because it was just cheaper than average to go and stay in a nice building in the beautiful grounds. And therefore it seemed sort of less like you were being ripped off than if you went to something that was sort of a little bit more glamorous, shall we say.
I mean, that one of the standard cons is to offer you something very inexpensive at the start and then lead on to more. So is it expected that people will make donations? I mean, with many groups, when somebody receives an inheritance of some kind, it will flow straight into something like the International Temple Fund. Did you have any evidence of that?
Yes, I know that there are lots of people who have given their homes, their inheritance, left the group, absolutely ridiculous amounts of money, thinking that it will help them benefit all living beings. There was an old chap who passed away when I was living at the Nagarjuna Centre in Northamptonshire, and he said that he planned to leave a large amount of his money to the Buddhist community, he called it, because you do believe when you're on the inside that this is a really meaningful way to spend your money, and
good karma.
And it happens. It's happened a lot, and when some people say, well, the fact that the NKT has so many centres in all different places is evidence that it works. It's not evidence that it works, it's evidence of financial abuse and exploitation and vulnerable people giving the group large amounts of money. That is not evidence that the practices are good for you psychologically, or that anyone has achieved enlightenment, which ultimately would be the evidence that it works.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still waiting. I've been hoping to meet somebody enlightened since I was 18, and as yet, sadly, it hasn't happened.
No.
But if anybody would like to, who is enlightened,
I am.
would like to come, apart from Sam, obviously, who would like to come and explain that to me on camera, or we can do it by Zoom. I don't mind, because it is this baffling thing that you're being sold something that you can't see. You're being sold something that isn't evident, and when the higher up you go in an organisation, the less enlightened people tend to be, in my experience.
Well, as someone who's been attacked from inside the inner circle, I would agree with you. There certainly seems to be a lot of pathology there.
Wasn't there some mention in the B.F. Schofield article that they were exaggerating the number of centres by claiming things like libraries and apartments were centres as well?
Yeah, so I think the way it's worded on their website is that they have 1,300 centres and branches all over the world. We haven't actually been able to sort of clarify the exact number, because that would involve a lot of work.
You need somebody like Jeff Augustine.
Apparently
he's amazing at getting all the numbers and
right. Yeah, well, apparently they did used to have a sort of map on their website where you could see them all. They don't have that anymore. I think there's probably a reason for that. Yeah. You can type in each individual country and it will tell you how many buildings they own, but that would still involve quite a lot of research. So I'm not actually clear. I know that there has been evidence that they do inflate numbers. The NKT are absolutely obsessed with claiming that they've had so many thousand people attend, and those numbers are dwindling, I think, but the numbers that they claim they don't reflect that. So they're not technically lying, because they're saying that they have admitted that some of those are branches and therefore they're not the buildings that they own. But I think there is some exaggeration there, yeah.
Okay. Are members pressured to spend too much time on NKT practices?
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is, when you're indoctrinated, is that you may not think that you're being pressured, because you may honestly believe that the only meaningful way to spend your time is to engage in the practices. So some people would also say that you're supposed to be able to integrate your practice into your daily life, even if you're at work or whatever, because it's how you use your mind that is considered your practice. So if you're a really committed practitioner and a true believer, what you would be doing is dedicating all of your actions towards Buddha, towards enlightenment, towards the Sangha in your mind all day long. And you would be practicing viewing everything that you eat as dissolving it into emptiness and considering it a manifestation of emptiness. So I met many people who are so far gone now that they say that they protect their mind all the time from outside influences that would take them away from the doctrine and the teachings, because they've practiced thought stopping and thought control and emotion control for so long that they've learned to shut down their mind when anything causes them any doubt or challenges their faith. So it's not so much that someone comes along and says, you should be doing... It does happen sometimes that, the management will come along and say, you're not dedicating enough of your time to the centre and you're not going to enough of the classes. But mostly I think people pressure themselves, really. Yeah. But they don't see it that way because spiritual bypassing feels good. And so, I met many people I attended the teacher training program once or twice. I was curious. And I met people who say, I will never stop doing this. There is nothing that anyone can say because I'm in less emotional pain now. So why would I stop doing this?
Whereas the Dalai Lama put the point of view that if he found something to be scientifically true that disagreed with Buddhism, he would accept the scientifically proven way. So this kind of passionate dedication, no matter what, my country, wrong or right, it does seem quite dangerous that anybody should get to this point where they're no longer able to think about something. So with the German generals who swore their oaths to Hitler, that you must not violate an oath. That's important. So, I will love you forever, no matter how hard you hit me, no matter what you do to me. And it becomes pathological.
Yeah, I mean, really people just cope by not looking at other information and...
gatekeeping.
And they call, there's a practice that it's called guarding the gates of the senses against anything that challenges your faith.
Or blindness, as it's also known.
Yeah. And so you could say that they've started doing that through deception regarding the teachings and indoctrination. But it's tricky to know whether that you would call... They wouldn't perceive that as pressure.
Yeah.
Okay. Does NKT isolate members?
Yeah, again, some people will isolate themselves because of their beliefs that they should limit their time spent with people who are non-practitioners. So it's again considered that if you spend too much time with deluded people, that they will... Yes... that they will get in the way of your achieving enlightenment, and they will tempt you with worldly things that will appear to make you happy, but they won't. Also, because of the groupthink and the extreme level of the indoctrination, that does make communication with outsiders difficult. So you might become distant from people because you're not relating to them authentically. And people get urges to invalidate people's feelings using the teachings. So obviously that interferes with relationships. Then there's also the fact that lots of the centres are really isolated in the middle of nowhere with poor transport links, and lots of members don't have cars. So those that do live in the centres, they do become isolated. And that has led lots of people to burn bridges really over the years, because when I was only involved for 18 months, but the people who were involved for years, this process has been going on for them for quite a long time. Lots of people do become very isolated.
And thusly dependent.
Yeah, Yuval refers to it as isolated and engulfed.
Which he takes from Alex Stein.
Yeah.
We quote each other as we go along.
Don't we? Yeah,
but I don't know if she took it from somewhere else, but that's where we first talked about this, being isolated and being engulfed, so that you're completely overwhelmed within the system, dependent upon it.
In what way does the NKT abuse members psychologically?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the whole belief system is gaslighting. So the belief that abuse only exists in the mind, I think the direct quote by Kelsang Gyatso is that abuse arises from misconceptions within the mind.
So what would he have done with Jimmy Savile?
Just think the
misconceptions for his mind.
That's right.
Yeah, I really don't know. Of course, then you're encouraged to see your abuser as your teacher, as we've spoken about before. Yeah. So the crazy wisdom idea, which is a problem across many so-called Buddhist groups, the idea that the actions of your teacher are perfect and you shouldn't question them has led people to be severely psychologically gaslighted when they are trying to speak up about unacceptable or abusive behaviour. And we know now that one of the biggest predictors of developing PTSD is lack of social support following an abusive experience or traumatic experience. And actually, the way that the community responds to you following your trauma has been shown to be possibly even more traumatizing than the original traumatic event. So it's like a double whammy. You get abused, and then you try and run to a safe haven, someone you trust, and then they just invalidate you further, and then you're left doubting your own sanity, and you're left feeling spiritually inadequate.
And we have a whole system that is doing this. I frequently talk with people who have tried to get help through the medical system and who find themselves completely thwarted and indeed told there's nothing wrong with them and they ought to get on with their lives.
Yeah.
And they're, I within 2 minutes of talking, 10 seconds of talking to such a person, I can see that I'm dealing with somebody who has complex PTSD. It's very obvious when you've seen the signs of it, and something that we need to change socially a great deal. I think the blame the victim is also a fundamental aspect of our society, which we need to.
Yeah, well, the bystander effect, I would say, is hugely exacerbated within Buddhist groups. It's already our tendency to side with the perpetrator slightly, apparently, because siding with the perpetrator, all that involves is you do nothing.
Yeah.
Whereas to side with the victim, you have to actually do something and perhaps stand up to someone who's quite frightening. So this is exacerbated hugely within a Buddhist group where patient acceptance is considered more spiritual than saying, actually, I think you've just crossed my boundaries or the boundaries of this other person.
Hit me again.
Yeah.
For my own good karma.
Yeah. So that's one way. I would also say, I think there's many ways, really. The idea that if you're working for the NKT and cherishing their centres, that you are accumulating merit, which you can sort of cash in order to help you on the path to enlightenment, I would say that is abuse. Because the way I see it now, it's a bit like you're Sonic the Hedgehog collecting these rings, like ching, 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 cashing them in towards enlightenment. You're just helping the NKT to expand, and you're annihilating yourself by putting the care of the centre above self-care. So I would say that is psychological and physical abuse, because, okay, maybe no one's actually physically attacking you, but you are neglecting your own body through overworking, stress, poor self-care, as well as the spiritual bypassing, and that will eventually affect your physical health. And I spent some time with a nun who was banned from going to yoga because yoga was considered Hindu and not Buddhist. And she told me that her physical health had significantly deteriorated during that time, and that ban was placed on her by the admin director of the centre. So I would say that is psychological, but also physical abuse indirectly, really, through encouraging people to self-neglect by saying that they should just represent the pure doctrine instead. I suppose she could have gone to Pilates. Maybe that would be okay, because it's not considered something that's of a different religious background. But still. So yeah, there's those aspects. And the other one that springs to mind is obviously the threats and the attacks on whistleblowers and former members. The idea is to destroy your psychological and your social and your economic resources through that. So online slander whereas before the internet, all you could do was gossip to the people around you to ruin someone's reputation. Now it's not limited to the place where you physically live. You can ruin someone's reputation worldwide. So even if they move on somewhere else, it still affects them. So I would say that is psychological, social and economic abuse, because your reputation also impacts on your ability to make friends because of whether people trust you or not. And I would say that threatening people who wish to share their experience is the silencing of people. I know from my own experience of how I feel if I try and silence myself, and it makes me ill. And okay, people can speak to their family and friends if they understand, they can speak to a therapist, but sharing your experience and having the world say, that sounds really awful, I'm so sorry that happened to you. These people are denied that experience because they've been attacked into silence, or when they have spoken up, they've been trolled so much and it's been so traumatizing that they've stopped speaking up. So those are just the ways that spring to mind right now. I think there's probably more of them. But,
fair enough.
Yeah. And also really just the whole principle that you should be destroying your self-cherishing, I would say, is abuse. There's no self-cherishing mind. I'm happy to go on video and say there is nothing that exists inside of you, in your brain or your heart or on your mental continuum, whatever you think about consciousness or the mind, wherever you think that's located, there is nothing that is the self-cherishing mind or the ego that you can permanently destroy. All you'll do is severely gaslight yourself and severely neglect yourself emotionally and physically. So to suggest to vulnerable people with mental health problems, which they target through their advertising, to pretend at first that they're just teaching them mindfulness and meditation, and then later on tell them that they might be reborn in a hell realm if they don't work to destroy themselves, that is a really sick form of psychological abuse, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and I think teaching self-distrust to people as a fundamental is always extraordinarily dangerous, because good people are very willing to see themselves at fault. Bad people are not in the least bit willing to see themselves at fault, and there tends to be this effect where the bad people rise to the top once it's a matter of examining yourself. And so you find the Reformation of the Catholic Church in the early 16th century, you've got guys going around selling indulgences. These indulgences will grant that you will spend a short time in purgatory and thus be able to go to heaven. You can have masses sung for you. You can put a tremendous amount of money into the church to make monasteries tremendously, wealthy places. And yet what you're getting is a piece of paper that was actually drafted by a banker by the end of the time of indulgences. The Fugger family went out themselves. They didn't even send priests out to collect the money. And you've arrived at this corruption, which is about taking away the locus of control from the individual, saying, we know more about you than you do. You've got all this bad stuff going on in you. It's going, and fundamentally saying, and I think the Freudian conception goes this way too, that you're a bad person, and the best that you can hope for is to be slightly less bad.
Yeah.
And you'll get to that by doing what your teacher tells you, even when your teacher's a complete monster. The guru, fixation, bad things. Things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What do members say about people who have left the new Kadampa tradition?
Yeah, so I mean, if you just leave quietly and don't make a fuss and don't say anything negative about any of the practices or any of the tradition, you'd probably just be considered to be deluded. So you've fallen off the path, you've been tempted back into the world of mundane, ordinary minds and worldly happiness that will just disappoint you. So you're a little bit you're not protected anymore, you're unfortunate, you are deluded. If you're someone who speaks up, however, then you're a Mara, you're a spy, you're mentally ill. So it depends what you're doing after you leave, really. So, if you challenge the tradition, I don't think it's a tradition, But if
It's
you
a new
challenge,
tradition.
you challenge the group or the teachings in any way, they'll just say that you have an angry mind, and that it's your reaction to whatever you've experienced that's the problem. But you're trying to project that onto the NKT instead of taking responsibility for your angry mind. Someone trolled me with that just a couple of days ago on my website. I have a regular troll who sets up new email addresses very frequently just to troll me, with sort
Must
of...
make you feel special, though, being stalked.
Yeah, with slightly ironic, irritating names that suggest they think that they're better than me, that are all fake. I think this is actually somebody that I lived with who I know. They don't use their real name. I think I know who it is. And so a couple of days ago, I think it's a he said that I was exposing my angry mind to the whole world and I'm completely humiliating myself. Yeah.
We didn't want to tell you, but...
I know, yeah. Well, one thing I've realised is that trolling actually helps increase the visibility of my site.
So keep doing it.
Yeah. So while people think that they're just humiliating me for my healthy reaction to ongoing severe psychological abuse and harassment and attacks, they're actually just making my site more visible to other people who might be vulnerable and really in need of support. So thank you.
And they are able to expose their angry minds and do something about it, rather than living in this angry tangle, which is the new Kadampa tradition, frankly. You mentioned Mara there. Should perhaps say that in Buddhist folklore, Mara is initially considered the god of death, who appeals to the Buddha when the Buddha achieves enlightenment, sitting under the ficus tree. Mara basically is told, well, I'm off into nirvana now, I've had enough of you lot. And Mara then pleads with the Buddha to remain. And the Buddha says, but men's eyes are covered in dust. And Mara says, but on some the dust is thin. And this is meant to be the beginning of the Buddha teaching. So Mara is a kind of controversial figure. He either appears as himself or through his daughters, according to different stories, to sexually interest the Buddha, who obviously has his eyes closed, so can't see anything. But he tries to tempt, and when he realizes that the Buddha is beyond temptation, he then encourages him to teach. So you've got this contradicting, slightly conflicting, let's say, idea of Mara. What you're saying with Maras is this notion of some spirit or individual who is outside of Buddhism, who is nonetheless trying to tempt Buddhists away from the path. For what reason, we're not quite sure.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% clear on it, but I'm not sure whether they really view Amara as a manifestation of some kind of evil spirit, hungry ghost, or an emanation of Buddha trying to teach you. I would have to read back over how it's described in the NKT, but because it's a closed loop self-referential system, they can see anything that challenges their faith as something they just need to transform into the spiritual path. They can just use this to say that any ex-member who shares how they've been mistreated by the group, they're just Amara, and therefore don't listen to their story. And actually, back in the summer, when my videos were being posted in the Facebook group of the followers, there was an instruction not to watch and not to be seduced by clickbait with any kind of title like "Here's my sob story," whatever. So that's another thing, is they like to make out that you are playing the victim, because it's part of the belief system that abuse only exists in your mind. They don't use like words like victim, perpetrator, abuser, or anything like that. So if you're saying, look, this happened to me, they'll just say, oh, you're just playing the victim, it's your karma, it's something you did in a previous life, rather than recognising that actually there's something about the system and the teachings that is enabling this to keep happening, and that we should be listening to people who have been seriously hurt within this group.
And authoritarian groups pretty much always, everything good that happens to you is a consequence of your membership of the group. Everything bad that happens to you is your own fault.
Yeah, exactly.
If the teaching doesn't work, it's because you didn't apply it properly.
Yeah.
And round we go. The amount of responsibility is minimal. I put up a video called But Is It Buddhism, which has in it the Kalama Sutta, which is a fundamental teaching of the Buddha, which quite evidently the New Kadampa tradition completely ignore, because the Buddha is insisting that you question everything. And they're saying, if you question us, you're a Mara.
Yeah.
So they're anti-Buddhist. They're not just not Buddhist, they're anti-Buddhist in their teaching.
I would say so, yeah.
What does hell mean to believers?
Yeah, I think that differs. So from what I understand, it's slightly different to the Christian idea of heaven and hell, because it wouldn't be something that they would consider permanent. You know, I think people could consider that they would be reborn in a hell realm and then later be reborn in another realm.
So they'll be set on fire for a few hundred years, but then after that.
Yeah, although they are told that if they turn away from their teacher, that they will spend 1,000 aeons in a hell realm. So,
could I just say that in the whole of the Digha Nikaya, the Buddha's Long Sutras, there is no mention of hell. Hell is there is so much in the Taoist and the Buddhist teachings, in the Christian teachings, wherever you go, there is so much that is added on later and then taken as being scripturally exact. And the Buddha was not in the least bit concerned with hell or hell realms.
No.
It's not an aspect of the teaching.
No, well, I attended a teaching on the Wheel of Life where people were clearly anxious and depressed afterwards, and they told me that they were, because of all the talk about how it's totally dependent on the mind that you're holding in the second that you die that determines your rebirth. So people are asking questions like, well, what if I develop dementia and I can't control my mind?
It's a good question.
Or what if I die in a car accident suddenly? I don't think I can control my mind then. But then the teacher would just dismiss it and say, oh, you're not really supposed to get worried and anxious about this. You know?
Don't worry, you're going to hell. I mean, the most famous of all of the Tibetan teachings is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where it contradicts this notion of the thought at the end of your life. You then actually have several days of where you can have monks reciting things over you and steering you through. So you don't need to worry about it. The thing you do need to be sure of is that the moment you die, you're surrounded by Tibetan Buddhist monks, so they can do this. So always keep 2 or 3 of them
around all the time.
So, I mean, there's different realms that they consider that you could be reborn into: the animal realm, the God realm. And it's considered that the purification of your mind and the collection of positive karma and virtuous actions through your mind, not necessarily what you do in the actual world, because according to one of the teachers, killing could be a spiritual action if it's done with bodhicitta. So it's not necessarily what you do, but the mind that you do it with, according to the NKT, that would determine your rebirth.
And we can take that to the ridiculous Aum Shinrikyo, Sahara's group. He adopted a variety of ideas from Buddhism, and one of them is the idea of power, which is that the more excruciating the pain you put somebody through, the more of their bad karma you exhaust. That led Aum Shinrikyo to gather enough sarin nerve gas to kill 4 million people. I mean, they were hoping to kill the whole population of Japan for their own good. And so it shows you how you can take an idea on board and say, well, look, if I hurt you really badly, then that's your bad karma being exhausted. Whereas if I'm nice to you, that's not going to do you any good at all. So you can take one of these simplistic ideas and develop it whichever way you want. And you end up, with, say, Soldier Zen, where you are empty at the moment where you kill the other empty person, the old Bushido code. This astonishing idea that you can murder people compassionately. Because John Kabat-Zinn, the founder of mindfulness, has taken this on very thoroughly in teaching that mindfulness will inevitably lead to compassion. And that's why he's taking large amounts of money from the US military to teach soldiers mindfulness so that when they kill somebody, it will be compassionately.
Yeah.
I can't get my head around the silliness of
No,
this. I
no.
really can't.
I mean, I've heard so many arguments now, about how you must practice either mindfulness or no, mindfulness isn't enough because you could be a mindful sociopath. You need to be an ethical Buddhist as well. And yet I met more malignant narcissists within both the NKT and Triratna than I meet on the street.
Mm. Yeah.
So I don't think...
Go figure.
Yeah. I don't think that, particularly belonging to a group, I don't think there's any guarantee that you could be less narcissistic or more compassionate. And I've seen lots of evidence that suggests actually the opposite.
And you know, ultimately, when you look at the great cults of the 20th century, the authoritarian groups, that's the Bolsheviks and the Nazis, they end up being just bunches of malignant narcissists. And it's interesting when you look at the career of somebody who was lower down in the ranks, you find that fanatical belief, you find that concern that you are saving the world. You know, the Zionists are going to take the world over if we don't kill them all. They're vermin, they have to be exterminated. It's for the good of the world. And we have to be very careful about where our thoughts lead us. For me, the beginning thought is compassion, not mindfulness. It's am I genuinely concerned about the other person or creature that I'm dealing with? And the answer is no. No. Sometimes I am, but that's something that I have to keep questioning on a daily basis, rather than thinking, well, they're scum, so I can exterminate them, or they're Maras, or they're finding some term with which I can dismiss other human beings. I don't accept any of those ideas.
According to the new Kadampa tradition, who will go to hell?
You will.
Yeah, I guess we've already covered this in terms of it's all about what proportion of your time and with how much faith have you been practicing according to their teachings. That is what would determine who is reborn in a hell realm.
So did you only give 99% of your money to
So if you speak out against them, is that going to make it more likely that you'll end up in one of these hell realms?
Oh,
and
yeah,
this is
certainly.
a personal question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, luckily for me, it's meaningless, so I don't feel at all threatened by it. I have been threatened with rebirth in a hell realm for how much I've been speaking up. People have said that I will die with an angry, bitter revenge mind on my mental continuum. I mean, that would only apply if I actually died in the moment where I felt bitter. That's not a mind state that I would be in for the rest of my life. I mean, I'm doing these videos because it's relevant to my recovery and I think it will be supportive for other people. But that doesn't mean that, but because they believe that you could die. I mean, obviously we can die in any moment, but they're constantly focusing on the fact that we could die today. Then they have threatened me with rebirth in a hell realm based on my current mind state. So yeah, I would say that from their perspective, because speaking up against Kelsang Gyatso is considered a sin, that they would think that about me and other testimony writers.
Yeah.
That's it.
Is that it?
Oh, actually.
Oh, you've got some more.
Yeah.
Come on.
One more. Would speaking out about sexual abuse in the new Kadampa tradition be enough to damn you to hell? Similar.
Yeah, similar. So I don't think all members will think that. I think there are some members that are yearning for accountability.
Yeah.
We've seen a new level of disquiet on the inside recently. So, for example, a nun recently accidentally posted publicly on Facebook a post about Pema Chodron's resignation, saying, this suggests that actually Genna Tubton should not be teaching again because he is known to have had sex with many of his followers within the NKT. But she then wrote, oops, I meant to send this to someone in a private messenger. But we've never seen that level of disquiet before, where people are actually talking to each other, ordained members, saying, perhaps this isn't okay, because other groups are saying this isn't okay, and that abuse doesn't exist only in the mind. So I don't think that everyone within the group would consider speaking up about sexual abuse a sin. I think most people would say these days, report it to the police. If it was something that actually is rape, for example, I think most people would say, well, don't ruin the reputation of the group, but go and report it to the police. But
have you actually heard of cases where people have been told to report sexual abuse to the police by NKT?
So I have spoken personally to sexual assault survivors who were told not to go to the police because it would ruin the reputation of the NKT, and who were also told it was their karma. So if people are actually able to break free of their indoctrination sufficiently to recognise that it was actually abuse, then they might be told that that they shouldn't go to the police. I've also been told that there are many survivors of sexual abuse who believe that their sexual abuser, that they still do believe that this was a manifestation of, or an emanation of, some kind of enlightened being bringing them closer through the Dharma, to the Dharma. So it's very complex. Some people may never come to see that as abuse. And many people within the group will say, well, it has made you a stronger person, it has. So can you really deny that it hasn't helped you? So that goes on a lot. It does go on a lot. But I know that there is a level of dissatisfaction that they have broken their internal rules by allowing Genla Tubman to teach again. They do at least have an internal rule that if you have broken your vows, then you should not be allowed to teach again. You can still be ordained, but not to actually teach. They've completely disregarded this rule. I saw recently that they actually introduced a safeguarding policy in 2018 with 2 internal safeguarding officers who I've been told are not nice people. They're far too indoctrinated, and their main purpose in having a safeguarding policy would be to protect the reputation of the group. So I would argue that if you combine the teachings with people's indoctrination and the reputation saving wish of the group, that safeguarding policy is completely meaningless. I had a similar experience within Triratna. That group fooled me into thinking that they had safeguarding in mind more than the NKT did, but it became clearer that really it was mostly about reputation saving, and you really need safeguarding officers who are with an external body that do not worship the guru for it to be meaningful at all.
And it's a problem that plagues our whole society, that lawyers, police officers, judges, all the officials of the state need to have a distinct body, not some of their mates who are now part of this body, and somebody who is willing to go after this. Our ombudsman services in this country are deplorable. The scandals in the National Health Service, and yet the way that the ombudsman there will bat away complaints. That Ian Patterson was able to perform over 1,000 unnecessary surgeries, breast surgeries on men and women, because it apparently gave him pleasure to do so, and was facilitated by a culture that doesn't recognise whistleblowers, doesn't support and protect whistleblowers, and doesn't have a proper notion of safeguarding. I mean, talking about sexual abuse in NKT, we very quickly skipped the idea of rape as sexual abuse. Well, of course, there are many forms of coercive behaviour that lead up to that.
I just chose that really as the example where I have seen people...
It's the most extreme example.
Saying you should report rape to the police. That's the only thing that I've seen people say that from current members.
So with lesser ones, it's not reported?
Well, again, it really depends on whether the person views it as abuse, and how someone could possibly go to the police and explain, hello, so a few years ago I used to be indoctrinated and I thought that my teacher was actually an enlightened being, and that if I self-generated myself as a deity and they did the same thing and then we had sex together, that would be a spiritual activity. But now, a few years later, I think that was probably exploitation, and they were in a position of power over me because they were actually my teacher. They still can't make sense of this for themselves yet. And there are about 5 people at the moment who I am in contact with who are saying, Michelle, I don't know if it was sexual abuse or not. You know, and that's just at the moment. And these are people who were having sex with people who were supposed to be celibate monks. I won't say any of their names, but I know who they are. And
if the police ever do get interested, we'll give the names. So
I mean, I'm trying to be careful in not saying yes, that was abuse, because, you know, I could get in trouble for planting the idea in their head one day that it was abuse. I try to validate people's intuition and perception. So if they say, Michelle, I think this was abuse, then I'll try and listen to that. I'm having the thought in my head, yes, that is really twisted and an abuse of power, and you've been gaslighted to hell and back. But I try not to say anything that could later get in the way of somebody's testimony, because if they say that they've been speaking to me and I said it was abuse, therefore it is, that might not actually help.
Yeah, and it must be for them to decide, and we're not in a situation to, you know, call people out and name names.
No.
We're here to issue a general warning.
But it is really sad to talk to these people and to hear just how traumatized they are.
Well, for me, NKT crosses the line in many ways, and one of them is you talked when we spoke before about this idea that when you go and sit on the throne, that you might be channeling the Buddha, which, as the Buddha dissolved into nirvana, and that's the idea of Buddhism, is not actually possible if Buddhism actually worked. So if you can channel him, he's still around. There is no nirvana. Forget it. But there's also this. You talked about embracing a deity. Now, for me, that's crossed the line into sexual harassment. That when you are teaching somebody to meditate upon having what is fundamentally an erotic contact with a non-existent being, then you've become psychologically abusive and sexually abusive to that person. And really the point you make about ordained monks and nuns, possibly, people who have taken a vow of celibacy, and they will go to a hell realm if they break it, according to what they say, who are perfectly willing to do this. And that there is nothing in place because of Gyatso's edict about not complaining and not, you know, it's not abuse. There's nothing in place to protect people. And of course, the majority of people who come to such a teaching will be vulnerable. They will be willing to give of themselves and give themselves up to a teaching. And if that teaching is being made by unethical people, by people who are not, frankly, ethically spotless, then it will go badly wrong.
And a lot of these, even the teachers, they have criminal records. You know, there's no background checks on any of these people, because it's just considered, well, if they found the Dharma, then they have the fortunate karma, and they can purify all of their previous actions through their mind. So there doesn't have to be legal consequences. I mean, I think this is what they say about Gena Tubton, that well, he went away and he purified his mind for all those things that he did before. It's 2020. You know, we can't rely on magical, mystical practices, and you can't guarantee that someone feels remorse or regret just because they say that they do either. So I would agree with you. It really is completely ridiculous, and people are highly vulnerable.
I mean, I was tremendously shocked a couple of years back. I saw something that Barbara Anderson had written, who was a whistleblower from the Watchtower Society, the Jehovah's Witnesses. And buried in the text was this statement that they were actually sending recruiters into prisons to recruit child molesters who would then be forgiven and might then marry some nice Jehovah's Witness widow who'd got a few children. And there were no checks. There was nothing, because they were forgiven. And this idea that you can, simply by saying, forgive me, or joining the Sangha, Buddhist Sangha, that you are now reborn and a new person. Well, that's fine. But it's not realistic. And it does mean, as you say, that if people are being given authority within a group without due diligence, without finding out their background, then you're dealing with a dangerous group, and it's time to leave. And I think probably at that point we should stop and have a cup of tea.
Yeah, I think so.
So thank you very much, and there'll be some more along the way somewhere. I'm John Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
I'm Michelle Hassan.
Thank you.